Welcome to Now in the 90s, where we look at the game releases of 30 years ago today. This week, we got a boxing game, a word game, and a Simpsons game. I'm your host, Jared, and today is September 23rd, 1992. Nintendo systems got boxing games that weren't just Punch-Out! Released this week in 1992 was George Foreman's KO Boxing for the SNES. George Foreman's KO Boxing is, well, it's a boxing game for the Super Nintendo. You play as George Foreman and punch your way through a gauntlet of opponents. Some of these opponents could be real people as well, but I couldn't tell you. I know very little about boxing. You can make George dodge left and right and barrage your opponent with a flurry of face and body punches until they get knocked out. Every time they get back up, their profile picture shows them a little bit more beat up. Somewhat hilariously, at the start of every round is the bikini-clad woman carrying the round number who walks across very slowly. And instead of a voice sample of the actually copyrighted "Let's Get Ready to Rumble," a voice sometimes says, "It's party time."
It's party time.
Actually, the voices are some of the funniest things in the game. Every now and then you get voice samples of George Foreman himself saying things like,
"How am I doing?
And
this guy can't hurt me. You're mine, old man."
Also, between each round, you will be reminded that this game is brought to you by Doritos. Take that, Call of Duty. Clearly, the gameplay is very similar, if not directly inspired by Nintendo's Punch-Out! But it goes a step farther than that. George Foreman's KO Boxing was developed by Beam Software, and this game uses the same engine of their previous boxing game, Power Punch 2, on the NES. Infamously, Power Punch 2 was originally a direct sequel to Mike Tyson's Punch-Out!, starring Mike Tyson until they removed him due to his ongoing legal issues. It gets weirder. George Foreman's KO Boxing was originally on the Sega Genesis, then ported to the SNES, but there would also be versions for the Sega Game Gear and the Sega Master System. However, those versions would actually be based on a different boxing game, James Buster Douglas Knockout Boxing from the Master System. Buster Douglas is the first man to famously knock out Mike Tyson. Upon release, George Foreman's KO Boxing received middling reviews despite his star power. Many didn't like the controls, graphics, or the unfair difficulty. It would get a sequel though, titled Foreman For Real, which, as a treat, we'll show it to you, because it's horrifying.
Go to your corner. You're out.
Also released this week in 1992 was WordZAP for the Nintendo Game Boy. WordZAP is a puzzle game where you're given a pool of letters and you need to put together as many words as you can from those letters. Oh, boggle. It's just boggle. It does feature two-player connectivity through the Game Boy link cable and 2 copies of the game, but in that, when someone makes a word that another player has already found, that word gets zapped and removed from both players' racks. Upon release, GamePro and Nintendo Power both praised it with positive reviews, but who cares about that? This is what you need to see. WordZAP is actually a port on the Game Boy, as it was originally released for Windows in 1991. That's, at best, Windows 3.0. It was on the Microsoft Entertainment Pack Volume 3. However, 30 years later, you can still visit its official website. Fire up your favorite internet browser and go to wordzap.com, and there it is in all of its 90s glory. The Game Boy got another release this week in 1992 with The Simpsons Bart vs. the Juggernauts. Bart vs. the Juggernauts is basically another minigame collection, similar to other Simpsons games. The story is a parody of American Gladiators and has Bart taking on various challenges, which are mostly platformers, more or less. One of them is like a basketball game where you have to avoid juggernauts and pitfalls. Another has you skateboarding down some huge ramps where you try to drop kick a juggernaut, and a sort of sumo wrestling one here where you drop kick a lady juggernaut out of the ring. There's more than that, but you can imagine how fun they are not. Interestingly, between each round, there's commentary by longtime Simpsons characters Kent Brockman and Dr. Marvin Monroe. The second guy is a rarity, as the character only appeared in the first season of The Simpsons. You may remember him from that one shock therapy episode. He was retired and then killed off screen in the series because Simpsons creator Matt Groening and his voice actor Harry Shearer didn't like him. So his appearance in the video game is a bit of an anomaly. Anyway, the game's dumb, but because they need to make some sales, Nintendo Power reviewed it favorably, and they're now playing section. And with the other games released this week, we'll go to Editor Dylan.
The other games released this week include Super High Impact for the Genesis. What can I say other than it's a football game? I mean, look at it. No, like, stop eating for a second and look at the screen. There, see? It looks exactly like you thought it would, doesn't it? Sorry, continue eating. Looks delicious, by the way. I'm just not much of a sports game type of guy, you know? I'd rather talk about the other game that came out this week. We're talking menu-based combat, we're talking multiple party members, we're talking unique characters with their own strengths and weaknesses, random encounters, upgradable stats. That's right, released on the NES this week in 1992 was Tecmo Cup Soccer Game. Okay, hear me out. This was originally released on the Famicom titled Captain Tsubasa, which was based on the manga of the same name. For the Western release, they whitewashed all the characters but retained most of the impressive animations. Before each match, you can get tips from your coach, and you could talk to the password lady who only speaks in wingdings. Each match has you moving to the goal until random battles occur. There, you can choose your next actions with different outcomes. Passing, shooting, dribbling. The only other game I know that even remotely resembles this is Blitzball from Final Fantasy X. I don't know, it's just such a fascinating game, and it just goes to show that you should always keep an open mind, regardless of any genre preferences. Which finally brings us to 5 games released on these 4 consoles this week in 1992. Apologies for the not-so-rapid-fire segment this week. I'll keep it short next time. Until then, Jared, let's talk prices.
Thanks, Dylan. George Foreman's KO Boxing's value has been completely knocked out. Loose cartridge is less than $10, and with a complete is barely under $30. The same goes for WordZAP. Just the card alone is $10, and complete is barely over $40. But that website, priceless. Bart vs. the Juggernauts is slightly better at just under $15 for the loose cart and just under $80 for it complete. Nothing is a value gainer this week. And that's it for today. Next week, we're looking at the first in a trilogy of action RPGs, a caveman game, and an all-new Contra. Sort of. I'm your host, Jared, and this was Now in the 90s. Thank you so much for watching Now in the 90s. Please like the video and leave a comment down below, and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you already are a subscriber, thank you so much. Hey, we did it. We got through an entire episode of George Foreman without once having to mention his George Foreman grill, even though I guess technically just now I kind of ruined that.